what's up guys? It's Jess. Welcome back to another video. I'm going to keep it going with the college content, and today's video is going to be what I wish I knew before my freshman year at the University of Washington and my advice to incoming freshmen. Number one is to never buy the textbook. Most professors will say whether or not you need the textbook in the syllabus, or they'll go over it during the first day of class. But if your professor says you need the textbook, don't buy it unless you're absolutely certain it is nowhere online. I have found every single textbook that I've needed since my fall quarter of freshman year just by searching the title name free PDF. If you think you can't find your textbook online, I think you need to try harder. I just change what I put in the search engine until it gives me the textbook. There's also classes where they say you need the textbook and you don't actually need the textbook. I took an Asian American Studies class my freshman year of college, and the professor said that we needed the 3 textbooks. I bought all of them, I think, for like $65, thinking I was going to use them. I did not touch them a single time during that class, and I got a 4.0. So in conclusion, just try to avoid spending your money on buying textbooks that you don't need to spend your money on. Number 2 is to walk the route of your class schedule before classes begin. Before classes start, they will say where each class is located at. This is especially helpful if your classes are back-to-back and you need to figure out the shortest route possible to get from class A to class B. I would recommend like a day or two before your classes begin to just walk the route you need to get to all of your classes. Try and find the shortest way possible to get to each class so you're not rushing, especially if a professor runs a lecture late and then you have less time to walk to your next class. Before I memorized the route, I just used Google Maps to type in where the class was and then walk from there. Because usually Google Maps will tell you the shortest route possible. So just plan out your entire schedule for the week and then go day by day and try walking to each of your classes so you can measure the distance and then the time it takes to get to each class. My first quarter of freshman year, I had a walk from the physics astronomy building to Packer Hall. These 2 buildings are so far apart from each other, and my physics lecturer always went over her lecture time, so I was always running late to Packer Hall. And Packer Hall has a lot of seats in its lecture hall, and I was still always sitting in the back because I was always running late. That was just kind of an unfortunate situation that happened to me as a first quarter freshman. This kind of goes into my next tip, but I would recommend planning your schedule so that the classes that you do have back-to-back are close enough in distance that you can make it to the next class within the 10 minutes that you have. Luckily for me, I was a fast walker, so I was able to make it from the physics astronomy building to Packer Hall, but I looked like such a noob sprinting like this to my class. It's up to you if you want to have a whole class period break between each classes so you don't have to worry about rushing. I personally like to have my classes back to back so I kind of get them over with, if that makes sense. But it's definitely really helpful to have your classes like somewhat close together. My next piece of advice is if you don't like your professor's lectures, you can go to a different professor's lectures. During my freshman year, I was registered to take this one professor's math class. So you'd have the math lecture and then the math quiz section. I didn't like the way this professor lectured, so what I did was I stayed enrolled in his section in his class, but I always went to a different professor's lecture. Of course, this only works if you can fit the other professor's lecture during your own schedule, but luckily for me, I had an opening where I could go to the other math professor's lectures and I wouldn't screw up my schedule. You can also just actually switch out of the class you don't like so it shows up on your My Plan schedule, but most of the time the other professor's lecture is probably already full, or if you sign up for their class, it might screw up your schedule in some way because no quiz sections are open or something like that. So what I did was I stayed enrolled in my one professor's class so that I could still go to the quiz section and be enrolled and nothing would be screwed up. But then I just watched the other professor's lectures. Hopefully that makes sense. If you guys still have any questions about it, you can comment it down below, but it worked for me and my schedule. I will say this might be a little tricky because professors do write different exams, but I feel like as long as you know the material, you should be good to go regardless of which class you're in, because that's what professors should be doing, is writing their exams based on the material that you're supposed to know. So I personally didn't have a problem with going to the other guy's lectures, even though I took my original professor's exam. I still did as well as I probably could have if I went to his lectures, especially because I wasn't learning anything in his lectures anyway. The next piece of advice I have is that you need to find a way to connect with faculty members. There will be a lot of internships and REUs and different summer programs that you're going to want to apply to, and most of the time you need 1 to 2 letters of recommendation. And most of the time, this has to be from a faculty member at the college you go to. There are actually a lot of ways to connect with faculty members. It's just a lot of students don't feel the most comfortable doing so. It may seem like it's really difficult to connect with these professors when you're in such a big lecture hall because they're not going to know who you are. So this is where it's important to go to their office hours or even just shoot them an email saying like, hey, can we set up a one-on-one meeting? Can we do a Zoom call so you can get to know me, I can get to know you and your work? This kind of goes into my next tip, which is to seek out undergrad research opportunities as soon as possible. When you decide on the research you're interested in and which professors do that kind of research at your school, then you can reach out to them via email, introduce yourself, say you're interested in their research and would love to hear more. Even if they're unable to offer you a position at that time, you can still request to schedule a meeting so that they are able to get to know you more. Because letters of rec don't have to come from professors you do research with. It could just be a professor that knows you well and knows your work ethic well. Also, the faculty members that write your letters of recommendation don't necessarily, most of the time, have to come from your major. For example, there was one faculty member that I got to know really well. She got to know me really well. She got to know my personality, my work ethic, and she was a faculty member that was nothing at all close to being related to astronomy and physics. Yet, because she knows me so well, she would be able to write a really good letter of recommendation for me. My next piece of advice is to do things that you can put on your resume and to work at jobs that will be relevant to your career. During my freshman year, I was so worried about how I was going to pay for my college tuition that I pretty much took any job that I can get and worked so many hours just so I could have some kind of security in paying my tuition. One, working so many hours didn't allow me enough time to prioritize my academics. But two, the jobs that I was working weren't related to my future career, so it would feel weird to put it on a resume. I used to work at Dunkin', and one of the customers actually convinced me to quit. But the customer said, NASA's not gonna care if you work at Dunkin'. And that just blew my mind because that's so true. They want to see my passion for astronomy and physics and see how the activities I do relate to that passion. I personally don't see the connection between Dunkin' Donuts and a passion for astronomy and physics, and NASA probably won't see that either. So while I do think it's important to think about ways you're going to afford college, I think there are different ways and smarter ways in which you can do that rather than getting some minimum wage job that's not even related to your career. My next piece of advice might be an unpopular opinion and might not work for everyone, but this is just based on my personal experience. I would recommend prioritizing your academics instead of worrying about how you're going to afford it. I worked 4 jobs during my freshman year of college to try and pay for tuition somehow. So like I said earlier, 1, these jobs weren't related to the career that I was pursuing, but 2, I was constantly working so many hours as an attempt to save up money for the tuition that I needed to pay off. So while it's important to keep your financial situation in mind, I don't recommend prioritizing these minimum wage jobs over your academics. If you think about it, your future employers are going to look at what? Not how much you made, they're going to look at your GPA and what classes you took and how well you did in them. Since I have experimented and experienced so much in the realm of trying to afford college, I think my next video will be how to earn money as a college student. Another thing I wish I knew was that you don't have to pay for grad school. I've always wanted to go to grad school, and I've been so turned away by the fact that I would have to pay another 4 years worth of tuition. But apparently you don't have to pay for it. I don't know if this is just for physics and astronomy, since I haven't really seeked out any other grad schools for any other majors. But for sure, if you're pursuing physics or astronomy, you don't need to pay for grad school because you can be a TA or you can be a researcher, and that kind of covers the cost of you being there. My next piece of advice is to use your status as a student to get free stuff. And what I mean by that is that you can use your college student email to get discounts on Spotify Premium and Hulu, I believe. And also you get free Amazon Prime for 6 months, I think, as a student, which is super nice. Another thing I wish I knew was to bring business casual clothes to school. There were so many instances in which I needed business casual wear and I didn't have them because I just don't wear business casual clothes. I would recommend having at least one outfit you could wear to interviews and career fairs and stuff like that. My next piece of advice only applies to UW students, but if you are going to be one, I would recommend joining the FIG program. This class is really helpful for students to transition from high school to college, and you definitely get to know more about the school and Washington overall. I really enjoyed being in this class for multiple reasons. One, because the teacher isn't actually like a teacher, it's another undergrad student, so they're definitely more relatable in that way. Another thing I really liked is there are no tests or exams. It's really just for you and for you to get to know more about the school. If you end up liking the FIG program, you can actually apply to be a FIG leader, which is what I did. So if you guys want to know more about my experience, I can make a separate video on it, but it was super fun. I highly recommend. This is also a great thing you can put on your resume. I didn't know how competitive the major system was before attending UW, and I think it benefited me by not knowing how competitive it was, because then I was never worried about if I was going to get in or not. So while I wouldn't say this is something I wish I knew before freshman year, I'll tell you guys anyway, just so you can be prepared that the majors are competitive. My next piece of advice is to go to Dog Days. Dog Days is pretty much a week-long festival with a bunch of different events. There is always something going on during the first and second week of school. The poster sale is so fun. I would recommend going to that. They also have the movie night where they have this big projector and you just like sit on the lawn, which was so fun. They also had the carnival in Red Square. My friend Kaden and I made friendship bracelets too. There are so many events you can go to, so I recommend just going on the UW Dog Days website so you can see which ones you really want to go to. Relating to that, within the first month of school is going to be the RSO fair. RSOs are registered student organizations at UW, and as I've said in my previous videos, I highly recommend you join at least one RSO your freshman year. I made so many great friendships that I'm so grateful for that I wouldn't have made if I didn't join these RSOs. My next piece of advice is to seek out academic resources. If you go to University of Washington, go to CLU, go to the Math Study Center, and go to the Physics Study Center because those are extremely helpful. Another life hack I have is if you're stuck on a WebAssign problem or mastering physics problem from a prereq course, if for some reason you are unable to use one of these academic resources that I have mentioned, most of the time the internet is going to be your friend. You can find different websites or maybe even YouTube videos that thoroughly explain the problem that you're struggling with. I would just like to mention that I do not advise copying and pasting an answer if you find one on the internet. There are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do that, but one of them is because you actually need to know how to do these homework problems for your exams. So if you see a resource online, try and look through the ways in which they went through the problem and then try a problem on your own based on what you've seen there. There are actually a lot of WebAssign and mastering physics problems on YouTube, especially for the prereq courses. This gets very limited once you get into the higher level courses, but for the prereqs, you should have some online resources available for you. My next piece of advice, if you're taking a math course at UW, definitely search up Mr. Loveless UW on Google to find his website. Not only is he a great professor, and if you have the opportunity for him to be your professor, then I highly recommend you find a way to get in his class. But he has so many great notes and lecture material and exams on his website. He just does a really good job of explaining each lesson and what you need to know from each lesson, which a lot of professors do not know how to do. So yeah, if you're ever taking a math course at UW, I would recommend getting Loveless if you can, and if you can't, just using his website as a resource for you. Another thing I wish I knew is that you can use your Husky Dining account pretty much everywhere, but specifically you can use it at Starbucks and Cultivate. I did not know you can use your Husky Dining account at the Starbucks at Suzzalo, but apparently you can, so now you know. Another thing to know is that scheduling 8 a.m. classes is a lot more difficult than you may think. I consider myself to be an early morning person that likes to get stuff kind of out of the way so I have more time to do things throughout the day. When I was in high school, I fit so many things into my schedule. I was like Superwoman waking up at 6 a.m. and that just feels so impossible in college. So while I'll probably stick to an early morning schedule anyway, I would just like to point out that it's a lot harder than you may think to wake up for these classes. My last piece of advice I wish I followed before my freshman year was to stay in shape over the summer. This is just based on my personal experience trying out for the Husky boxing team, which I think is one of the hardest tryouts at UW for a club sports team. But based on that experience, I definitely wished I got into the best shape of my life over that summer. Even if you're not going to join the Husky boxing team or even any sport for that matter, just stay in shape. It's definitely helpful in college so you don't gain the freshman 15. That is the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed. I actually have to go now to my last shift because I put in my 2 weeks. If you guys have any comments or questions for me, feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. Like I said, I'm going to keep it rolling with the college content, so if you guys have any specific videos you'd like to see, just let me know and I'll be happy to post them. I'll see you guys in my next video. I need a catchphrase or something. I'll work on it. Bye-bye. Oh my gosh.